Family. Like it or not, we all have one. You may have tried to ignore your family, but they're still there. Right down the hall from your room, actually. Your family may be big, it may be small, it may be somewhere in the middle. But no matter what it looks like, families all have one thing in common. No family is perfect. Maybe you think your mom is too strict. Maybe your little brother won't stop going through your stuff. Maybe your grandmother follows you on Instagram. Pretty cool grandma right there, but we get it. Sometimes it's enough to make you literally count the days until you get out of school and get out of your house. One problem though, you can't quit your family. Because what happens today impacts your tomorrow, and the next day, and the one after that. Okay, it basically impacts your entire future. But here's the thing. Just because families aren't perfect doesn't mean you need to bail on the whole bunch. In fact, not only can you survive your family, you can impact what it's like in your home. So whether you're the golden child or the black sheep, you can find your family's silver lining.
Have any of you ever taken driver's education? Some of you probably have, and others of you probably will in the not-so-distant future. I did. I was 15 and still learning to drive, and Leonard Gokenauer, our woodworking teacher, taught driver's ed on the side. He always smelled like coffee, and after sitting in his car for an hour, so did I. Most of my time spent in driver's ed was watching the clock, dying for it to be over. On the last day, he taught us all about parallel parking. He set up these cones and we had to park in between them. And if you tapped a cone, it's not a big deal, no damage done. And because there was very little parallel parking in my small town, I could not have paid less attention to Mr. Gokenauer as he taught us how to park. It's a decision that I eventually regretted. 3 years later, I decided to attend college in a city, which meant I was smack in the middle of a parallel parking nightmare. It was everywhere and it was awful. Every time I tried to park, all I could think was, I should have paid more attention in driver's ed. I bet I wouldn't have 14 cars waiting on me to squeeze my boat-sized Dodge into this spot that was made for a tricycle. We've all been there. Every one of us has a story of how we didn't pay attention when we should have, and how not paying attention came back to bite us. Unfortunately, in the moment, most of us just aren't thinking about how what we do now will affect us later. Whether it's an algebra class or a Spanish lesson or basketball practice, we've all had that regret of, I wish I could go back and learn something then so I could apply it now. The same is true about your family. As difficult as it is to believe, learning to deal with your family is as much about your future as it is about your now. When you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see because all you're thinking is, when am I going to be out on my own? When will no one tell me what to do? I go to school and I'm bossed around, and then I come home and I get bossed around some more. When can I stay up as late as I want and hang out wherever I want with whomever I want? Or maybe you're thinking, when I'm in charge, I'm going to be way different than my parents. I'm going to be so cool. I'm going to handle my family so much better. Maybe your parents have lost your respect. Maybe your stepmom has lost all credibility in your mind because of the way she acts. You think, she doesn't deserve my respect, so I'll do what she says when she earns it. All of us have probably felt that way at some point or another. We think the way we respond to our families is okay because of who they are. And we're convinced that if we had different or better people in our families, that the way we feel and act and respond would be different. That's why some of us just check out and we disengage. We figure we'll act better when our circumstances are better. But what if we're wrong? What happens if we get out of the house, we turn 18, and all of a sudden, we have the exact same problem, either with our own family or with someone else who's in charge? What if checking out ends up hurting us in the long haul? Is it possible to start doing something now, even in a not so great situation with our family, that will help us out long term? Does what we do now even matter in life later? We probably won't ever get to decide who is in charge. Today it's our parents, at school it's our teachers, later it will be our bosses. But what if we started working on ourselves instead? Last week, we looked at two pretty dramatic moments in the life of Joseph. As a teenager, Joseph's dad, Jacob, liked Joseph more than all of his brothers. And as cool as that sounds, it actually caused Joseph a lot of trouble because his brothers hated him. In fact, they hated him so much that they wanted him dead. But when they realized that sounds a little crazy, they opted for selling him into slavery instead, because that's way better, right? Then we fast forward several years later in Joseph's life to a time when he reconnected with his brothers. This time, Joseph found himself in a position of power over his brothers. And instead of using it for revenge, Joseph did the unthinkable. He forgave his brothers. He showed them compassion when they did not deserve it. But as we're going to see today, this wasn't Joseph's first success. This was something he had practiced long before. You see, Joseph eventually became prime minister, appointed by the Pharaoh himself. But before that, his journey was filled with plenty of ups and downs. And just when things would start going really well, the carpet would be pulled out from under Joseph's feet and something would go horribly wrong. Any one of these obstacles would have probably made the average person just quit and say, forget about this. God obviously doesn't love me, and I just need to go my own way. But Joseph didn't respond that way. When he first arrived in Egypt, he found himself serving under a guy named Potiphar. And Potiphar was the captain of the palace guard. That's kind of like being the head of Secret Service. Potiphar made Joseph his personal assistant. And the more responsibility he gave Joseph, the better Joseph did. Even when he was in a low servant's role, Joseph was faithful. Scripture says it this way: Joseph found favor in Potiphar's eyes and became his attendant. And Potiphar put him in charge of his whole household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. So Joseph is in a great place. But the moment he settles into a sweet spot, Potiphar's wife came in like a wrecking ball. Genesis 39 tells us that Joseph was well built and handsome, and Potiphar's wife was crushing on him. Over and over again, she tried to seduce Joseph. But Joseph didn't give in. He was too trustworthy to be tripped up by this kind of temptation. And Potiphar's wife finally got annoyed from being rejected over and over. So she set a trap for Joseph. She lied, claiming that Joseph had forced himself on her. And as a result, Joseph was thrown in prison. As awful as this could be, it did not derail Joseph. He did the right things even in prison. He trusted that God was with him, and again, God did not forget about him. Instead, God allowed Joseph to become a favorite person of the prison guard. Okay, just to recap, at his dad's house, Joseph was the favorite. In slavery, serving Potiphar, Joseph became the favorite. And now in prison, Joseph has become the favorite of the people in charge. This guy is doing something right. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. While in prison, 2 palace employees were thrown in jail for having an argument. Joseph, with God's help, was able to help them settle their argument, and he did this by interpreting a dream for them. This made one of them, the wine taster, look really good. And as a result, he was put back into a position of power with the Pharaoh. Now, you would think that being in prison would be a season of life that you don't forget. You would think that you would remember the experiences you had and the people you met, and most importantly, the person who helped you when you were down there. But the wine taster didn't remember Joseph, and he didn't even try to help Joseph out. What could have been Joseph's ticket out of prison wasn't. Talk about disappointing. But even then, when things looked like they couldn't get any worse, Joseph did not stop being faithful to God and doing what he knew to be right. He honored those around him and respected people in authority, even though his circumstances were terrible. Even though the people in charge behaved badly, Joseph's actions were not dependent on their character. You could say that Joseph knew how miserable he could become if he based his feelings on the behavior and actions of the people around him. And he knew that his future would suffer, not just his present. The same is true for you. Learning to deal with your family is as much about your future as it is about your now. When I was in driver's ed learning to parallel park, I wish I had paid more attention. But it's so difficult in that moment to realize that this is connected to that. And it's hard to see how now is connected to later. But Joseph got it. He knew that learning how to handle difficult people now would affect who he would become later. He knew that the right behavior or attitude just wasn't going to magically show up in the moment. It was something that he would have to practice and learn over and over. See, learning to respect and honor the people closest to you affects how you feel in the moment, and it also affects who you become in the future. With that being said, here are a few things to remember. First, treat people well. How are you treating the people in authority? Are you rolling your eyes at everything they say? Are you obeying but with a really bad attitude? And how are you treating your siblings? Do you take ownership of your actions, or do you just blame what you do on how they act or what they say? Joseph took ownership. He did what was right, even when other people didn't, and it changed everything for him. How would you treat your family if your actions were based on honoring God and not based on how your family behaves? Second, react kindly. Listen, guys, so much in life is out of your control, especially when it comes to your family. You can't control who your siblings are, or if your parents stay married, or who your parents decide to remarry. So how you react to your circumstances really matters, because it's one of the only things that you get to control right now. Things aren't always going to go well, but that's not an excuse to behave any way you want. It's a chance to react well today so you can get even better at it in the future. Joseph was awesome in responding well to authority, and it set the stage for him to handle things well when it was his turn to be in charge. And last, believe God's purpose. Do you feel like you're looking for a chance to get out of your family? For a chance to change your circumstances? And do you feel like it's some kind of accident that you ended up where you are? Or do you think that God may have something for you to learn or do right now, right where you are? Do you believe that there's a reason God has you there? It may have seemed crazy at the time to believe it, but Joseph was certain God had him where he was on purpose. And that determined how he reacted to the people in charge. You see, the truth is, you're creating patterns now that you will carry with you for the rest of your life. Learning to deal with your family is as much about your future as it is about your now. Will you choose your actions, or will you let others determine how you react? Will you choose the standard for how you treat other people, or will you always wait for them to deserve it? As you head out today, I want you to know that with God's help, the harder you work at treating others well, and the harder you work at reacting to others in a positive way, the more success you will have in the long run, no matter who your authority ends up being. And the better you get at this, the easier it will be to believe and to live like you believe that God has a reason for you being exactly where you are right now. Honor your family now, as a teenager. Choose to treat and react well now, and it will pay off later, I promise.